Hi, everyone. We're going to finish up and look at our second part of our content for this week. We're going to talk about fluency and vocabulary and kind of the basis. Again, we're continuing on from the 5 big areas of reading from the National Reading Panel. We already talked about phonemic awareness and phonics. Today, in this video, we're going to talk about fluency and vocabulary, and then there will be one final video on reading comprehension. So first, we're going to start off with fluency. I love fluency. When I was teaching, I really focused a lot on fluency for many of my students, and I believe that this is kind of one of the easier areas of reading because it is so clean cut, and assistive technology really does work perfectly for fluency when it comes to collecting and analyzing data. So when I'm saying fluency is the ability to read a text accurately and quickly with appropriate pacing and intonation. So it really is comprised of speed, accuracy, and prosody. And so you might have some students who you can think of who pop into your head who maybe read quickly and accurately, but don't have the intonation, right? Don't have that prosody. Really, students must be able to easily recognize and decode individual words and chunk them into phrases and clauses. And so it's really kind of a combination of so many different skills: automaticity and word recognition, prosody and expression, and being able to then really combine all of those skills that they've maybe been learning in isolation when it comes to phonics and phonemic awareness, and now apply them in a multi-step process in sentences and phrases. And so I wanted to kind of share this. So take a minute if you haven't exposed to this. For those of you who did take the intro class, or if you're taking it right now, this is a suggested activity. But what this activity does, it's included on Misunderstood Minds through pbs.org. And there's a series of activities to simulate what it's like to have a reading disability. And this particular activity really does impact your fluency. So you can see here up at the top, when you see a Q, you're going to pronounce it as D or T, a Z, pronounce it as an M, and so on and so forth. So you can see that as you're reading, right, and then for the next word, you want to look, okay, a P is a B, okay, we begin our, okay, Q is a D or a T. Trip, right? So you can see how challenging and how disfluent it will be if you're really trying to decode and decipher each word at a time. This is what it can be like for some of our students with significant reading challenges. And if you kind of think forward, imagine how difficult it would be to then comprehend what you're reading if you're constantly doing these strategies of thinking about the letter, thinking about the sound, combining it with the next letter, and practicing that word and trying to remember everything that you've already just read as well. And so here's the actual translation, right? And I mean, it took me quite a few seconds to even get the first 3 words. And so there's a link to this on the bottom. You can look at the PowerPoint, but I find this particularly powerful for many regular education teachers. We'll look at the writing and the math ones, and I'll pull them up as well. Again, this could be a little redundant for some of you, but it's such a powerful tool to really think about what are some of the challenges and why fluency and assistive technology are so important for our students to bridge that gap and support them. And so what is fluency instruction, right? What should it comprise of? And so really what we want to be able to do is model fluent reading and have students read the same text aloud. And so much research is available to really reinforce the concept of repeated reading. I know I remember when I was, initially raising my kids, like, oh my God, they just want to read the same book over and over again. But like, that's great, right? Repeated reading is important because they learn fluency and they learn that tone because they're not focusing so much on the words. So we want to be able to provide guidance and feedback during repeated oral reading to improve word recognition, speed, and accuracy, as well as fluency, and increase that oral reading practice, right? So I'm constantly going to be practicing, encountering new words and context, applying my strategies that I'm learning in phonics and phonemic awareness, and doing some of those word attack skills and strategies. Assistive technology is so unique in kind of supporting this fluency instruction because we have a unique opportunity to provide a great model, right? So if we have a recording of a passage, we can record it either ourselves or using a program to really model fluent oral reading. And this is one thing that's really important, is that using text to speech, right, that automated reading isn't a good model of fluent oral reading because of the intonation, right, and the prosody. But we really can, with good tools, provide a great model. It can also provide on-demand or automated help, right? So for many of these tools, a student clicks on the word, I don't know the word problem, I click on it, and now it reads it out loud for me. And what is great about many of these tools is if I click on a word because I don't know it, it calculates that as an error. Woohoo! Like the last data and collection that we have to do. And then if we can just focus on analysis, that's huge. And they can also provide visual highlighting of phrases to guide that fluent reading and learning with expression. So what does it also do? So it allows for beginning readers to tackle more varied and challenging texts, right? So I can explore more texts if I'm using technology, and the technology can then read them out loud to me and I can practice my fluency. We can also get those text-to-speech tools, right? However, my disclaimer, right, is you don't want it to only be that automated reading because it's not necessarily modeling the appropriate tone and prosody. And you can provide a recording. And so that's what some of the tools that we'll explore in class allow the student to record themselves and send it to the teacher. And so then the teacher can utilize the analysis tools and then support the student in that, which is fabulous. And so here, again, I'm not going to preview these. We're going to have a fluency station in class, and you will explore and kind of see some of these. But these are some of the examples of fluency instruction. I love Read Naturally. Read Naturally has a lot of research-based fluency supports. They had a paper-based version. Their Read Live support is phenomenal. And you can see there are some other examples. Some of maybe you've heard of, and some hopefully will be new that you'll be able to explore. And so here are some of the apps. 1 Minute Reader is put out by Read Live as well, and it has the same exact flow and concept, but it's not the full program, so it's a lot cheaper, and it's used on the iPad. And these are two others as well, which you'll be able to explore more in class. Next, we're going to transition over to vocabulary. So please make sure that you jot down any questions that you have as you're watching these videos, and you'll be writing your particular takeaways, but please make sure you jot down any questions so that I can address them in class. So now we're going to talk about vocabulary. And so really this is looking at expanding students' breadth and depth of vocabulary knowledge. So thinking about the words that a student utilizes in speech and the words that they know in print. And research really shows, which makes sense, that vocabulary knowledge is highly correlated with reading comprehension. So if I have a high vocabulary, I'm generally going to have a high reading comprehension. And if I have a low vocabulary, my reading comprehension is most likely going to be impacted because I don't know all of the words that I'm reading, right? So it does make sense that you see this correlation between vocabulary and reading comprehension. And so vocabulary instruction can look in kind of lots of different ways. So we can have explicit instruction, which like I know when I was going to school, I had vocabulary words, we had vocabulary tests, and it was very explicit. Students are given definitions, other attributes, and then you get a vocab test. I don't see that as much in schools now. I think we see more implicit instruction, and students are exposed to words. We talk about keywords. We preview the vocabulary words before they see them within a particular reading or an activity. And I think that that's really where we see a lot of vocabulary instruction. There's other multimedia methods. Vocabulary is taught by going beyond the text. So looking at visuals, a lot of the semantic feature maps, looking at a graphic organizer, using sign language to teach vocabulary. But really when it comes to learning and acquiring vocabulary, practice is huge. So you really are going to increase capacity. I know that there's research out there, like how many times you need to hear a word, how many times you need to use a word, how many times you need to see a word in order to really adopt it into your vocabulary. And so there's research out there. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I know that that's available. And so really helping students also kind of make these associations, right? So what does this word relate to, and how does it connect to my learning, to my previous knowledge, to my background knowledge? And that's kind of goes back to that feature mapping or the semantic mapping for some students. And I really encourage, and we'll talk about this when we talk about math, but math is so full of so much vocabulary. Now, I really talk to my students about like, how can we then teach math more like we teach vocabulary, right? When you're learning about a variable, when you're learning about an exponent, right? These are very unique tier 3 vocabulary words that often we focus so much on the math application that we don't necessarily focus on using the word and learning the terminology, where so many of our students with disabilities get really caught up by the vocabulary, and then it negatively impacts their ability to demonstrate their understanding of the concept behind the terminology and being able to manipulate that, especially when it's packaged in a word problem. And so really, as we're talking about vocabulary within reading, I want to give this little preview about math and really think about, how can we encourage vocabulary instruction within math? And some of the tools that we're going to look at in class already are doing that and are teaching math vocabulary in this way. But I really want you guys to think about that as you're kind of reflecting on our content. So vocabulary tasks should be restructured as necessary. It's important that they fully understand what's asked of them when they're reading and understand the words that they're reading. And so understanding in the context of reading rather than focus only on the words to be learned, right? So kind of instead of just targeting, we're learning these 2 words, kind of really looking at the whole context of what they're reading. And restructuring vocabulary tasks and presenting it in different ways, as we talked about in the previous slides, are really important for many students who are at risk. So here are some of the tiers. I kind of talked about tier 3 vocabulary already, but you can see tier 1 are basic words, concrete. They're an oral vocabulary, kind of everyday use words. Tier 2 are more complex. They could be abstract. So there are some examples. Tier 3 are very complex and content specific, right? So for those of you who are in content areas, this is where we got variable, exponent, you have photosynthesis, you have sedimentary, igneous, right? All of those tier 3 words. And so many of our students not only have difficulty sounding them out, right, and decoding these words, but also then understanding the concept behind them. And so how can we utilize assistive technology to remove these barriers, especially when it comes to the decoding barriers? We'll talk about that in compensation, so that they can focus on the content. But really what a lot of these vocabulary tools that we'll be previewing is going to focus on how do we teach this concept and break it down to support our students in understanding and acquiring this vocabulary. And so here, these are kind of 2 of the websites that you will explore and kind of have time with when we meet in class. And here are some other ones that will be loaded. The majority of these will be loaded on iPads for you to explore. And again, thinking back to in video number 1, I talked about kind of our app analysis, right? Get something wrong. What is the feedback? What is the data collection? And is it truly teaching what it says it's going to teach? So this is kind of all the inventory that you'll be doing as you're exploring with these tools. Oh. And that's the end of vocabulary and fluency. Stay tuned. The next video will then investigate and talk about reading comprehension.